In the shadowed
Thank
corridors
you
of
for your
Westmount
service.
Palace, where
It's been a
whispers
pleasure
carry
to
more
meet you.
weight than proclamations, and loyalty is measured in decades of silent service, Captain Marcus Thornfield stood at the crossroads between duty and conscience. For 23 years, he had sworn to protect the crown, but never had he imagined that protection would require him to defend the memory of a beloved queen against her own family. The golden limousine that once carried Queen Isabella through triumphant processions now sat in the royal garage like a monument to a bygone era, and Duchess Victoria Ashworth, the late Queen's daughter-in-law, wanted it for her son's wedding. What should have been a simple request would ignite a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy and force everyone to question where true loyalty lies. The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls of Westmount Palace like a shroud, creating an atmosphere of solemnity that seemed fitting for the day ahead. Captain Marcus Thornfield adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time as he walked through the East Corridor, his polished boots echoing against the marble floors with the rhythmic precision that had marked his 23 years of service to the crown. At 51, Marcus had dedicated more than half his life to protecting the royal family, and the weight of that responsibility had carved deep lines into his weathered face. The palace felt different now, 6 months after Queen Isabella's passing. The vibrant energy that had once filled these halls had dimmed to a respectful whisper, and even the servants moved with a measured solemnity that spoke to the profound loss they all felt. Queen Isabella had been more than a monarch to those who served her. She had been a beacon of grace, wisdom, and unwavering dedication to her people. Her sudden death from a heart attack had left not just a nation in mourning, but a palace full of people who had genuinely loved her. Marcus paused before the portrait gallery, where dozens of royal ancestors gazed down from gilded frames. Queen Isabella's official portrait had been hung in the place of honor just last month, and he found himself studying her familiar features, the kind eyes that had seen him through his darkest moments as a young guardsman, the gentle smile that had made even the most formal state occasions feel warm and personal. She had been the kind of queen who remembered the names of every staff member's children, who insisted on personally thanking the kitchen staff after state dinners, and who never passed a guard on duty without a word of acknowledgement. The sound of sharp heels clicking against marble interrupted his reverie. Duchess Victoria Ashworth approached with her characteristic air of entitlement, her designer dress and perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to the traditional formality of the palace. At 38, Victoria had married into the royal family 5 years ago when she wed Prince Edmund, Queen Isabella's youngest son. While the marriage had been politically advantageous and publicly celebrated, those within the palace walls knew it had always been a union of convenience rather than love. Victoria had never quite fit into the royal family's traditional mold. Where Queen Isabella had embodied grace and service, Victoria seemed more interested in privilege and status. She attended the required charitable functions, but always with an air of obligation rather than genuine care. The staff had learned to be polite but cautious around her, knowing that their jobs could hang in the balance if they displeased the temperamental Duchess. "Captain Thornfield," Victoria called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that she had cultivated since joining the family. "I need to speak with you about an important matter." Marcus turned and offered a respectful bow. "Your Grace, how may I assist you?" Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were measuring his willingness to comply before even making her request. "It's about my son Timothy's wedding next month. As you know, it will be one of the most significant royal events of the year, with heads of state attending from across Europe. I want to ensure that every detail reflects the grandeur and importance of our family." Timothy was Victoria's son from her previous marriage, a young man of 22 whom she had brought into the royal family when she married Prince Edmund. The boy had always seemed uncomfortable with his sudden elevation to royal status, preferring his studies to the pomp and ceremony that his mother embraced so enthusiastically. His upcoming wedding to Lady Sarah Pemberton, daughter of the Earl of Gloucester, had been arranged more for political alliance than romantic affection, though the young couple seemed genuinely fond of each other. "I'm certain the wedding will be magnificent," Your Grace, Marcus replied carefully. The palace staff has been preparing for months to ensure everything meets the highest standards. Victoria guardus misibly. Yes, but there's one particular element I want to discuss. The transportation for the ceremony. She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him immediately wary. I want Timothy to arrive at the cathedral in Queen Isabella's golden limousine. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Queen Isabella's golden limousine was not just a vehicle. It was a sacred symbol of the monarchy, a rolling piece of history that had carried the beloved queen through countless state occasions, jubilee celebrations, and moments of national significance. The custom-built Rolls-Royce, with its bulletproof glass and golden accents, had been Queen Isabella's pride and joy. She had personally overseen every detail of its design and had often said that it represented the enduring strength and elegance of the crown. Marcus felt his jaw tighten as he processed the request. Your Grace, I'm not certain that would be appropriate. The golden limousine has always been reserved exclusively for the reigning monarch. Victoria's expression hardened. Captain Thornfield, perhaps you're forgetting that I am now the senior duchess of this family, and Timothy will one day be in direct line to the throne through his stepfather. This wedding is not some minor social event. It's a statement about the future of our monarchy. With respect, Your Grace, Marcus said, choosing his words carefully, the golden limousine has been retired since Queen Isabella's passing. It was her personal vehicle, and there's been no discussion of it being used for other purposes. The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several degrees as Victoria's face flushed with anger. Are you questioning my authority, Captain? Because I assure you, I have every right to make decisions about royal resources, especially for such an important family occasion. Marcus had faced down armed intruders, navigated political crises, and stood guard through terrorist threats, but he had never felt his principles tested quite like this. The golden limousine wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of everything Queen Isabella had represented. To see it used for what was essentially Victoria's social climbing felt like a desecration of the late Queen's memory. Your Grace, he said slowly, I believe such a decision would need to come from His Majesty the King himself. The golden limousine is not simply another royal vehicle. It holds special significance that goes beyond its practical function. Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Captain Thornfield, let me make something very clear to you. I'm not asking for your permission, nor am I seeking your opinion on the appropriateness of my request. I am informing you of what will happen. That limousine will be prepared for Timothy's wedding, and it will be in perfect condition. The challenge hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Marcus could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Not just the history of his service to the crown, but the deeper history of what the monarchy represented. Queen Isabella had spent her entire reign building trust with her people, showing them that the royal family could be both majestic and humble, both powerful and compassionate. Victoria's demand felt like a betrayal of everything the late queen had worked to achieve. Your Grace, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning within him, I cannot authorize the use of Queen Isabella's limousine without explicit approval from His Majesty. It is my duty to protect all royal assets, including their symbolic and historical significance. Victoria's face contorted with rage. Your duty, Captain, is to follow orders from your superiors. And I am giving you an order. My primary duty is to the crown and to the memory of those who have worn it honorably. Marcus replied, his military training keeping his voice level even as his heart pounded. I took an oath to protect and serve, and that includes protecting the dignity and legacy of Queen Isabella. The standoff stretched between them, two immovable forces representing different visions of what the monarchy should be. Victoria represented the modern view that royal privilege was meant to be enjoyed and displayed, while Marcus embodied the traditional belief that such privilege came with profound responsibility and sacred trust. You're making a very serious mistake, Captain, Victoria said finally, her voice cold as winter frost. "I will not be denied in this matter. If you will not cooperate willingly, I will find other ways to ensure my son gets the wedding he deserves." As she turned and stalked away, her heels clicking angrily against the marble, Marcus felt the full weight of the conflict ahead. He had served 3 monarchs during his career, but he had never faced a situation where his loyalty to the crown might put him at odds with members of the royal family itself. The golden limousine sat in the royal garage less than 100 yards away, but it might as well have been on the other side of the world for all the access he was willing to grant. Walking to his office in the East Wing, Marcus sat heavily in his worn leather chair and stared out the window at the palace gardens where Queen Isabella had loved to walk each morning. The roses she had personally tended were still blooming, their vibrant colors a reminder of the life and warmth she had brought to everything she touched. The thought of that sacred limousine being used as a prop in Victoria's social theater made his stomach turn. He picked up the secure telephone on his desk and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Sir Robert? It's Marcus Thornfield. We need to talk." Sir Robert Blackwood had been Queen Isabella's private secretary for over 15 years and was one of the few people in the palace who truly understood the delicate balance between tradition and politics that kept the monarchy functioning. If anyone could help navigate this crisis, it would be him. As Marcus waited for Sir Robert to arrive, he found himself thinking about the day Queen Isabella had first shown him the golden limousine. It had been delivered on a crisp autumn morning, and she had been as excited as a child with a new toy. She had insisted on personally inspecting every detail, from the hand-stitched leather seats to the small crystal vase that held fresh flowers during every journey. "This isn't just transportation, Marcus," she had said, running her hand along the polished golden trim. "This is a promise to our people that their monarchy will always be worthy of their trust and respect. Every time they see this car, they should feel proud of what we represent together." Those words echoed in Marcus's mind now as he prepared for the battle ahead. He knew that standing up to Duchess Victoria would likely cost him his career, possibly even his pension. But some things were worth more than personal security, and the memory of Queen Isabella was certainly one of them. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows of his office, casting long shadows across the photographs that lined his desk. Pictures of royal ceremonies, state visits, and quiet moments with the royal family that had defined his adult life. In the center sat his favorite photograph, Queen Isabella placing a Medal of Honor on his uniform after he had successfully foiled an assassination attempt 5 years earlier. She was smiling in the picture, but her eyes held the kind of genuine gratitude that couldn't be faked. "Thank you for keeping us safe, Marcus," she had whispered that day. "People like you are the true guardians of everything we hold dear." Now it was time to prove that her faith in him had not been misplaced. The golden limousine would remain retired, a monument to a queen who had understood that true royalty came not from what you could take, but from what you were willing to give. And Captain Marcus Thornfield was prepared to give everything to protect that legacy. Sir Robert Blackwood arrived at Marcus's office within the hour, his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of the stress that had become his constant companion since Queen Isabella's death. As the late Queen's most trusted advisor, Robert had been tasked with managing the delicate transition period while King Edward adjusted to his new role, and the various family members jockeyed for position within the changed hierarchy. At 63, Sir Robert had served the crown for nearly 4 decades, working his way up from a junior clerk to one of the most influential people in the palace. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him a scholarly appearance, but those who knew him understood that behind his gentle demeanor lay a sharp political mind and an unwavering dedication to protecting the monarchy's reputation. "Marcus," Robert said as he settled into the chair across from the captain's desk, "your call sounded urgent. What's troubling you?" Marcus recounted his confrontation with Duchess Victoria, watching as Robert's expression grew increasingly grave with each detail. When Marcus finished, Robert removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture Marcus recognized as his way of buying time to think through complex problems. "This is precisely the kind of situation I've been dreading," Robert admitted. "Victoria has been testing boundaries ever since the funeral, seeing how far she can push without facing consequences. But this, he shook his head. This is a direct challenge to everything Queen Isabella represented. Marcus leaned forward. What are our options? Because I can tell you right now, I will not authorize the use of that limousine, regardless of the consequences. Robert appreciated Marcus's principled stance, but he also understood the political realities they faced. The problem is that Victoria isn't entirely wrong about her status within the family. With Queen Isabella gone, and King Edward still finding his footing, she does hold considerable influence. Prince Edmund has always been malleable when it comes to his wife's wishes. But surely the king would support us in this? Marcus asked, though he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. Sir Robert's silence spoke volumes. King Edward, while a decent man, had always lived in his mother's shadow. At 45, he had spent most of his adult life preparing to be king without ever really believing the day would come. Queen Isabella had been such a vital, energetic presence that most people, including Edward himself, had assumed she would reign for at least another decade. Edward is struggling with the transition, Robert said carefully. He's been relying heavily on family members for support and guidance. The last thing he wants right now is to create conflict within the family, especially with Victoria. She's been very strategic in positioning herself as a stabilizing influence during this difficult time. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying he might actually approve her request? I'm saying that if this becomes a direct confrontation between you and Victoria, with Edward forced to choose sides, the outcome is far from certain. Victoria has been cultivating her relationship with the king very carefully. She's been attending all the private family dinners, offering advice on matters of state, and generally making herself indispensable. The political implications began to dawn on Marcus. This wasn't just about a limousine. It was about power, influence, and the direction the monarchy would take in the post-Isabella era. Victoria was using her son's wedding as a way to establish herself as the new matriarch of the family, and the golden limousine was the perfect symbol of that transition. There has to be something we can do, Marcus insisted. Some precedent, some regulation, something that would make this impossible. Robert pulled out a leather folder and opened it to reveal several official documents. I've been researching the legal status of the limousine since your call. Technically, it belongs to the Crown Estate, which means the reigning monarch has ultimate authority over its use. However, there are certain protocols and traditions that have governed royal vehicles for centuries. He spread the documents across Marcus's desk. The golden limousine was specifically commissioned for Queen Isabella's Silver Jubilee. The design specifications, the golden accents, even the interior furnishings were all chosen personally by her. In many ways, it's not just a royal vehicle. It's a personal artifact of her reign. Marcus studied the papers, looking for anything that might support their position. What about historical precedent? Have personal royal vehicles ever been used by other family members after a monarch's death? That's where it gets complicated, Robert admitted. There have been cases where royal vehicles were passed down or repurposed, but never one so closely identified with a specific monarch. The closest parallel would be Queen Victoria's carriage, but that was eventually retired to a museum rather than being used by subsequent generations. As they discussed the legal and historical complexities, Marcus couldn't help but think about the human element that these documents couldn't capture. The golden limousine wasn't just a vehicle to Queen Isabella. It had been her sanctuary, her mobile throne room where she had conducted countless important conversations and made decisions that shaped the nation. He remembered the morning after a particularly difficult state dinner with a hostile foreign leader. Queen Isabella had asked Marcus to drive with her through the countryside, and they had spent 2 hours in that limousine while she processed the evening's events and planned her response to a potential diplomatic crisis. The car had been filled with her wisdom, her laughter, and her tears. To think of it being used as a prop for Victoria's social ambitions felt like sacrilege. There's something else we need to consider, Robert said, interrupting Marcus's memories. Victoria isn't acting alone in this. She's been working closely with Lady Margaret Fitzroy, the Queen Mother's former lady-in-waiting. Margaret has been feeding Victoria information about royal protocols and traditions, essentially coaching her on how to navigate palace politics. Marcus knew Lady Margaret, and the revelation didn't surprise him. Margaret had been passed over for several important positions after Queen Isabella's death, and she harbored resentments about the new power structure. Aligning herself with Victoria was a way to maintain influence and possibly settle old scores. So we're not just fighting Victoria, Marcus realized. We're fighting a coalition of people who see this as their opportunity to reshape the monarchy according to their vision. Exactly, Robert confirmed. And they're using Timothy's wedding as their coming-out party. If they succeed in this, it will establish a new precedent for how royal resources are allocated and who has the authority to make such decisions. The weight of the situation settled over Marcus like a heavy cloak. This was no longer a simple matter of preserving the memory of a beloved queen. It had become a battle for the soul of the monarchy itself. If Victoria succeeded in commandeering the Golden Limousine, it would signal to everyone that the old traditions and protocols were meaningless, that power and influence mattered more than respect and reverence. What about the staff? Marcus asked. Surely the people who actually worked with Queen Isabella every day would support us in this. Robert's expression brightened slightly. Actually, that might be our strongest asset. The palace staff absolutely adored Queen Isabella, and they're horrified by what Victoria is trying to do. The head chauffeur, James Morrison, has already told me privately that he would refuse to drive the limousine for anyone other than the reigning monarch. James Morrison had been Queen Isabella's personal chauffeur for over 20 years. He knew every inch of that car and had shared countless journeys with the late queen. If anyone understood the sacred nature of the vehicle, it would be him. That's a start, Marcus said. But we need more than moral support. We need a strategy that will make it impossible for Victoria to proceed without creating a public scandal. Robert leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly working through various scenarios. What if we approach this from a different angle? Instead of simply refusing Victoria's request, what if we propose an alternative that would be equally impressive, but wouldn't involve the Golden Limousine? Marcus was skeptical. You've met Victoria. Do you really think she'd accept a compromise? This isn't about providing transportation for Timothy. It's about establishing her dominance and showing everyone that she can claim whatever she wants. Perhaps not, Robert admitted, but it might buy us time to build a stronger case. And it would put the burden on Victoria to explain why she specifically needs that particular vehicle, which could be embarrassing for her if the real reasons become public. As evening approached, Marcus and Robert continued to strategize, but both men knew they were fighting an uphill battle. The monarchy was a complex institution that balanced tradition with politics, reverence with pragmatism, and individual desires with collective responsibility. Victoria had chosen her battlefield carefully, timing her demand to coincide with maximum pressure and minimum resistance. There's one more thing, Robert said as he prepared to leave. I've heard rumors that Victoria is planning to invite several prominent journalists to cover Timothy's wedding. If that limousine appears in international media as part of the ceremony, it will become much harder to maintain that it was an inappropriate choice. Marcus felt his heart sink. A public spectacle would make their fight exponentially more difficult. Once images of the Golden Limousine at Timothy's wedding were broadcast around the world, it would be nearly impossible to explain why the decision had been wrong without creating embarrassment for the entire royal family. How long do we have? Marcus asked. The wedding is in 3 weeks, Robert replied, which means Victoria will probably want to announce the transportation arrangements within the next few days to generate additional media interest. As Sir Robert left his office, Marcus stood at his window watching the palace grounds settle into evening tranquility. The gardens that Queen Isabella had loved were bathed in golden sunlight, and he could almost see her walking among the roses, stopping to examine each bloom with the same attention she had given to matters of state. He thought about the oath he had taken as a young man, swearing to protect and serve the crown with honor and integrity. At the time, he had imagined that meant facing external threats, terrorists, assassins, foreign agents. He had never imagined that the greatest threat to everything he held sacred would come from within the royal family itself. But Queen Isabella had taught him that true service sometimes required difficult choices, that protecting the crown meant more than simply following orders. It meant understanding the deeper principles that made the monarchy worth defending and having the courage to stand up for those principles even when it was personally costly. That night, Marcus made several phone calls to longtime colleagues throughout the palace. He spoke with the head groundskeeper who had maintained the gardens for Queen Isabella, the chief housekeeper who had ensured every state dinner met the Queen's exacting standards, and the chaplain who had provided spiritual guidance during the monarchy's most challenging moments. Each conversation confirmed what Marcus already knew in his heart. The palace staff felt a deep sense of betrayal at Victoria's attempt to appropriate the golden limousine. Queen Isabella had treated them like family, and they were prepared to honor her memory, even if it meant risking their positions. As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he looked once more at the photograph of Queen Isabella on his desk. Her gentle smile seemed to encourage him, reminding him that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the personal cost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions, but Marcus had found his resolve. The golden limousine would not become a prop in Victoria's performance. It would remain what Queen Isabella had always intended it to be, a symbol of dignity, service, and the sacred trust between the crown and the people it served. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would change the entire dynamic of the conflict. Marcus arrived at his office to find a formal summons waiting on his desk. Duchess Victoria had requested a meeting with King Edward to discuss urgent matters regarding royal protocol and the upcoming wedding celebrations. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon, and Marcus's presence was specifically requested. Sir Robert appeared in Marcus's doorway within minutes of this discovery, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. "She's forcing the issue," he said without preamble. "Victoria is gambling that Edward won't want to create family drama over what she'll present as a simple wedding detail." Marcus studied the ornate letterhead of the summons. "She's clever. By framing this as a discussion about protocol rather than a direct confrontation, she puts Edward in the position of having to actively oppose her rather than simply maintaining the status quo." Exactly. And given Edward's current state of mind, actively opposing family members is the last thing he wants to do. Robert sat down heavily in the chair across from Marcus's desk. "I spent most of last night thinking about this situation, and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. We need to change the nature of the conversation entirely." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Instead of making this about whether Victoria can use the limousine, we need to make it about what Queen Isabella would have wanted. We need to remind Edward of his mother's values and vision for the monarchy." Robert pulled out a leather portfolio. "I've been gathering some materials that might help us make that case." He spread several items across Marcus's desk. Photographs of Queen Isabella with the golden limousine at various state functions. Copies of speeches where she talked about the sacred responsibility of royal symbols, and transcripts of private conversations where she had discussed her hopes for the future of the monarchy. "This is powerful material," Marcus admitted, studying a particularly moving speech Queen Isabella had given about the symbolic importance of royal traditions. "But will Edward be receptive to it, especially with Victoria and her allies present?" Robert's expression was grim. "That depends on whether we can reach the part of Edward that truly loved and respected his mother, or whether Victoria has already convinced him that moving forward means abandoning the old ways." As they prepared for the afternoon meeting, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. Victoria had chosen the timing and the setting, and she would have prepared extensively for every possible argument they might raise. But sometimes, Marcus reflected, the most important battles were the ones where victory seemed impossible. The meeting was to be held in the king's private study, a room that had been Queen Isabella's favorite place for serious conversations. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, many containing the margin notes of generations of monarchs who had grappled with the challenges of their time. Portraits of past kings and queens looked down from gilded frames, creating an atmosphere of historical weight and continuity. King Edward sat behind his mother's mahogany desk, looking uncomfortable in surroundings that still felt foreign to him despite 6 months on the throne. At 45, he possessed his mother's kind eyes, but lacked her natural authority. The crown had always seemed destined for him, but the reality of wearing it had proven more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Victoria arrived with an entourage that demonstrated her political sophistication. Prince Edmund flanked her on one side, providing legitimacy through his bloodline connection to the crown. Lady Margaret Fitzroy accompanied them, her presence lending an air of traditional protocol to Victoria's modernizing agenda. Most surprisingly, Victoria had also brought Timothy himself, a strategic move that would make any opposition seem like an attack on a young man's wedding day. Timothy Ashworth Windsor stood awkwardly near the window, clearly uncomfortable with being used as a prop in his stepmother's political maneuvering. At 22, he was a thoughtful young man who had struggled to find his place within the royal family since his mother's marriage to Prince Edmund. Unlike Victoria, Timothy seemed genuinely uninterested in the trappings of royal privilege, preferring his studies in medieval history to the public ceremonies that his stepmother embraced so enthusiastically. "Your Majesty," Victoria began after the formal greetings were concluded, "I want to thank you for taking time to address this important matter. As you know, Timothy's wedding represents a significant opportunity to showcase the strength and continuity of our family during this transitional period." Edward nodded uncomfortably. "Of course. We all want the wedding to be a memorable occasion." Victoria smiled, sensing an opening. "That's exactly why I believe we should make use of all available royal resources to create the most impressive ceremony possible. The Golden Limousine would provide exactly the kind of majestic transportation that befits such an important family celebration." Marcus watched Edward's reaction carefully. The king's hesitation was obvious, but so was his reluctance to create conflict. "The limousine, that was Mother's special car, wasn't it?" "Indeed it was," Victoria replied smoothly, "which is why it would be so meaningful to use it for Timothy's wedding. It would be a beautiful way to honor Queen Isabella's memory while celebrating the future of our family." The manipulation was expertly done, Marcus had to admit. Victoria had reframed her request as a tribute to Queen Isabella rather than an appropriation of her legacy. But Marcus could see the flaw in the argument, and he knew this might be his only chance to speak. "Your Majesty," Marcus interjected respectfully, "if I may offer a perspective from someone who worked closely with Queen Isabella regarding the limousine." Edward looked relieved to have input from someone outside the family dynamics. "Please, Marcus, I value your insights." Marcus stood and moved to the center of the room, drawing on decades of experience in presenting clear, factual information under pressure. Queen Isabella was very specific about her vision for the Golden Limousine. She saw it as a symbol of the covenant between the crown and the people, something sacred that represented the continuity and dignity of the monarchy itself. Victoria's eyes flashed with annoyance, but she maintained her composed exterior. "That's a beautiful sentiment, Captain, but surely Queen Isabella would have wanted the limousine to continue serving the royal family rather than gathering dust in a garage." "Actually," Marcus continued, pulling out one of the documents Robert had prepared, "Queen Isabella left very specific instructions regarding her personal effects and their symbolic significance." He handed the paper to King Edward. "She wrote this memo just 2 months before her death, outlining her wishes for how various royal artifacts should be treated in the future." Edward read the document with growing attention, his expression becoming more serious with each paragraph. Queen Isabella had indeed been very specific about preserving the dignity and symbolic meaning of royal artifacts, emphasizing that their power came from their sacred associations rather than their material value. She writes here, Edward said slowly, that the Golden Limousine should be preserved as a symbol of her reign and the values she tried to embody. She specifically states that it should not be used for purposes that might diminish its symbolic significance. Victoria's carefully controlled facade began to crack. Your Majesty, surely those instructions were meant to prevent commercial exploitation, not to deny the limousine's use for important family occasions. But Timothy stepped forward unexpectedly, his quiet voice cutting through the tension. Actually, I don't want to use Grandmother Isabella's car for my wedding. Everyone turned to stare at the young man who had just undermined his stepmother's entire strategy. Timothy's face was flushed with embarrassment, but his voice was steady. I've been thinking about this ever since Mother brought up the idea, and it doesn't feel right to me. Grandmother Isabella was always kind to me, even though I wasn't her biological grandson. Using her special car for my wedding feels like taking something that doesn't belong to me. Victoria looked as though she had been physically slapped. Timothy, darling, you don't understand the importance of making a proper impression. This wedding is about more than just you and Sarah. It's about the future of our family's position. Maybe that's the problem, Timothy replied with surprising firmness. Maybe we're thinking too much about position and not enough about what's right. Prince Edmund, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. The boy has a point, Victoria. Mother always taught us that true nobility comes from service, not from spectacle. Marcus felt a surge of hope as he watched the family dynamic shift. Timothy's unexpected stand had given others permission to express their doubts about Victoria's agenda, and the room's atmosphere was changing from one of political maneuvering to one of genuine moral reflection. King Edward set down Queen Isabella's memo and looked around the room at each person present. I think Timothy's instincts are correct. The golden limousine should remain retired as a tribute to Mother's memory. We can certainly provide other magnificent transportation for the wedding, perhaps the state carriage or one of the other ceremonial vehicles. Victoria's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, anger, calculation, and, finally, a forced acceptance. Of course, Your Majesty. I simply wanted to ensure that Timothy's wedding would be worthy of the royal family. If you believe other arrangements would be more appropriate, I certainly defer to your judgment. But Marcus could see in her eyes that this was not the end of the matter. Victoria was not accustomed to being denied what she wanted, and she would undoubtedly regroup and find other ways to assert her influence. This victory was significant, but it was likely just the first battle in a longer war. As the meeting concluded and people began to leave, Timothy approached Marcus near the door. Captain Thornfield, thank you for standing up for Grandmother Isabella's memory. I know it couldn't have been easy to oppose my mother. Marcus was struck by the young man's maturity and moral clarity. You showed real courage today, Timothy. Your grandmother would have been proud of you. I hope so, Timothy replied. I've been thinking a lot about what kind of person I want to be as part of this family. Today felt like an important step in figuring that out. After Timothy left, Marcus found himself alone in the study with King Edward. The monarch sat quietly behind his desk, staring at his mother's memo with an expression of deep contemplation. I miss her wisdom, Edward said finally. Mother had a way of making even the most complex decisions seem clear and obvious. I feel like I'm stumbling through every choice, hoping I don't damage everything she built. Marcus approached the desk respectfully. Your Majesty, if I may say so, your decision today was exactly what Queen Isabella would have wanted. You chose principle over politics, dignity over spectacle. She would be very proud of how you handled this situation. Edward looked up with gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, Marcus. I know this puts you in a difficult position with Victoria. She won't forget that you opposed her today. I serve the crown, Your Majesty, not individual members of the family. Queen Isabella taught me that there's a difference between the two, and sometimes that distinction requires difficult choices. As Marcus left the king's study, he felt a complex mix of emotions. They had won this particular battle, but Victoria's parting look had promised that the war was far from over. The golden limousine would remain retired, but other challenges would inevitably arise. The monarchy was entering a new era, and the struggle over its future direction had only just begun. Walking through the palace corridors toward his office, Marcus passed the portrait gallery once again. Queen Isabella's gentle smile seemed to convey approval, but also a warning. Protecting the values and traditions she had embodied would require constant vigilance and unwavering courage. The confrontation over the limousine had revealed the fault lines that ran through the royal family, and future conflicts would test everyone's commitment to the principles that made the monarchy worthy of the people's respect and loyalty. The golden limousine would continue to rest in the royal garage, a silent monument to a queen who had understood that true power came not from what you could claim, but from what you chose to preserve for future generations. 3 weeks later, on the morning of Timothy's wedding, Westmount Palace buzzed with an energy that had been missing since Queen Isabella's funeral. The grounds were immaculate, decorated with thousands of white roses and gold ribbons that caught the early morning sunlight like captured stars. Despite the controversy over the limousine, the wedding had proceeded with magnificent preparations that showcased the best of royal tradition without compromising its deeper meaning. Captain Marcus Thornfield stood in his dress uniform at his assigned position near the palace's main entrance, watching as guests arrived for what would be one of the most significant royal events of the year. Heads of state, nobility from across Europe, and representatives from the Commonwealth nations streamed through the ornate gates, their formal attire creating a river of elegant color against the ancient stone walls. The past 3 weeks had been challenging for Marcus. True to his prediction, Duchess Victoria had not forgotten or forgiven his role in denying her the golden limousine. She had launched a subtle but persistent campaign to undermine his position, questioning his judgment in various administrative matters and suggesting to King Edward that perhaps it was time for fresh perspectives in key security positions. Victoria's campaign had been sophisticated, never directly attacking Marcus, but instead raising concerns about whether traditional approaches to palace security were adequate for the modern challenges facing the monarchy. She had allies among some of the younger staff members who saw the old guard as obstacles to necessary modernization, and she had leveraged these relationships to create an atmosphere of uncertainty around Marcus's future. But Marcus had also discovered unexpected sources of support. The confrontation over the limousine had crystallized something important for many palace staff members. It had forced them to choose between convenience and principle, between political expedience and moral courage. Most had chosen to stand with the values that Queen Isabella had embodied, creating a quiet but powerful coalition dedicated to preserving the monarchy's dignity and integrity. Timothy emerged from the palace looking remarkably composed for a young man about to marry before an international audience. He wore the full ceremonial uniform of the Royal Guards, a tradition that connected him to generations of family members who had served their country with honor. Marcus was struck by how much the young man had matured in recent weeks, as if the confrontation over the limousine had awakened something deeper in his understanding of what it meant to be part of the royal family. "Captain Thornfield," Timothy said as he approached Marcus's position, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. This day feels right in a way it wouldn't have if we had proceeded with Mother's original plans." Marcus smiled at the young man who had shown such unexpected courage. "Your Royal Highness, you were the one who made the crucial decision. Standing up to family pressure couldn't have been easy." Timothy glanced back toward the palace where Victoria was making final preparations, her elaborate fascinator and designer gown clearly intended to ensure she would be prominently featured in all the media coverage. "It's still not easy," he admitted, "but Grandmother Isabella once told me that being royal isn't about getting what you want. It's about doing what's right even when it costs you something." The state carriage that would carry Timothy to the cathedral had been prepared with meticulous care. While not as symbolically charged as Queen Isabella's golden limousine, it was nonetheless a magnificent vehicle with its own proud history. The carriage had been used for royal weddings for over a century, and its presence provided exactly the kind of traditional elegance that the occasion demanded without appropriating symbols that belonged to a different legacy. As the morning progressed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the complex dynamics that had emerged from their victory. King Edward had grown more confident in his decision-making, seeming to find strength in the realization that he could honor his mother's memory while still moving the monarchy forward. The successful resolution of the Limousine controversy had given him a template for handling future challenges, listening to diverse perspectives, but ultimately choosing the path that preserved the institution's integrity. Sir Robert Blackwood appeared at Marcus's side, his usually serious expression showing hints of satisfaction. "The international press coverage has been overwhelmingly positive," he reported. "The media are praising the wedding's balance of magnificence and restraint, and several commentators have specifically noted how the ceremonies honor Queen Isabella's legacy while celebrating the family's future." Marcus nodded, understanding the significance of this development. Public perception was crucial for the monarchy's survival and effectiveness. If Victoria's plans had proceeded, the appropriation of Queen Isabella's limousine would likely have generated cynical coverage about royal excess and insensitivity. Instead, the careful attention to symbolic meaning had created exactly the kind of respectful, dignified narrative that strengthened public support for the institution. "What about Victoria?" Marcus asked quietly. "How is she handling the attention?" Robert's expression grew more complex. "She's adapting, as she always does. I think she's beginning to understand that her approach needs to be more subtle if she wants to maintain influence. The direct confrontation over the limousine taught her that there are limits to what the family and the public will accept." As the wedding procession prepared to depart for the cathedral, Marcus observed Victoria making final adjustments to Timothy's uniform with the practiced eye of someone who understood the importance of visual details. Despite their fundamental disagreements, he had to admit that she genuinely cared for her son and wanted his wedding to be perfect. Her methods might be misguided, but her motivations weren't entirely selfish. Prince Edmund approached the carriage with Lady Sarah Pemberton, Timothy's bride-to-be. Sarah was a remarkable young woman whose genuine warmth and intelligence had won over even the most traditional palace staff. Unlike some royal brides who seemed overwhelmed by the attention and protocol, Sarah appeared to genuinely understand and appreciate the historical significance of the role she was accepting. "Captain Thornfield," Prince Edmund said as he helped Sarah into the carriage, "I wanted you to know how much I appreciated your counsel during the recent difficulties. Mother was right to value your judgment and integrity." The comment carried extra weight coming from Prince Edmund, who rarely involved himself in palace politics, but whose opinion carried significant influence with his brother the king. Edmund's support would provide additional protection against any future attempts to undermine Marcus's position. As the wedding procession departed for the cathedral, Marcus remained at the palace to coordinate security for the reception that would follow the ceremony. The next several hours would be crucial, as hundreds of dignitaries mingled in an atmosphere that needed to feel both secure and welcoming. During the quiet period while the wedding ceremony proceeded at the cathedral, Marcus took a moment to visit the royal garage where Queen Isabella's golden limousine sat in dignified retirement. James Morrison, the head chauffeur, was there as Marcus had expected, carefully maintaining the vehicle that had been such an important part of his working life for over 20 years. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" James said, running a soft cloth over the gleaming golden trim. "Sometimes I come here just to remember the conversations we had during our drives. Queen Isabella treated me like a trusted advisor, not just a chauffeur." Marcus understood the sentiment completely. Queen Isabella had possessed a rare gift for making everyone around her feel valued and important, regardless of their official position. The golden limousine had been more than transportation. It had been a mobile office, a sanctuary, and a symbol of the personal relationships that made the monarchy more than just an institution. "Do you think we did the right thing?" James asked, keeping it from being used for the wedding. Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think we honored what this car represents. Queen Isabella always said that symbols derive their power from the respect we show them. Using this for Victoria's purposes would have diminished that power, turned it into just another luxury item." James nodded, his weathered hands continuing their careful maintenance work. The young Prince Timothy understood that, didn't he? When he spoke up against his stepmother's plans. "Yes," Marcus agreed. He showed remarkable wisdom for someone his age. Queen Isabella would have been proud of him. As they stood in companionable silence, both men reflected on the changes that had swept through the palace since Queen Isabella's death. Some changes were inevitable and necessary, part of the natural evolution that kept the monarchy relevant and effective. But other changes represented threats to the core values that made the institution worthy of public support and respect. The sound of returning vehicles announced that the wedding ceremony had concluded successfully. Marcus and James quickly made their way back to their respective duties, knowing that the reception would require their full attention. The palace would soon be filled with guests celebrating not just a wedding, but the successful navigation of a challenge that had tested everyone's commitment to the principles they claimed to serve. As the newlyweds arrived at the palace for their reception, Marcus was struck by the genuine happiness radiating from both Timothy and Sarah. Despite all the political maneuvering and family drama that had surrounded their wedding, they had managed to create something authentic and meaningful. Their joy seemed to transform the atmosphere, reminding everyone present that beneath all the protocol and tradition, they were celebrating a love story between two young people committed to building a life together. King Edward gave a toast during the reception that surprised many with its eloquence and emotional depth. He spoke about the continuity between past and future, about honoring tradition while embracing change, and about the importance of making decisions based on principle rather than convenience. Though he never mentioned the Limousine controversy directly, everyone present understood that he was drawing lessons from that experience and applying them to his vision for the monarchy's future. Duchess Victoria also gave a speech, graciously praising the wedding's elegance and success. She had clearly decided to present herself as fully supportive of the final arrangements, demonstrating the political acumen that had made her such a formidable player in palace dynamics. Marcus suspected that she had learned valuable lessons from their confrontation and would be more subtle in future attempts to shape the monarchy according to her vision. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus found himself once again in conversation with Timothy, who was still wearing his ceremonial uniform but had relaxed into the easy confidence that came with successfully navigating a major life event. "Captain," Timothy said, "I've been thinking about something grandmother Isabella once told me. She said that every generation has to earn the respect that the monarchy receives, that it's not something we inherit automatically, but something we have to prove we deserve." Marcus was moved by the young man's thoughtfulness. "That's a profound insight, Your Royal Highness. How do you think your generation will earn that respect?" Timothy considered the question seriously. "I think by remembering that our privileges come with responsibilities and that those responsibilities are to something larger than ourselves. The Limousine controversy taught me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is saying no to something we want, if accepting it would compromise our principles." As Marcus made his final security rounds of the evening, he reflected on the events of the past month. The confrontation over Queen Isabella's golden limousine had become something much larger, a defining moment that would shape the monarchy's future direction. They had successfully defended the symbolic integrity of the institution, but more importantly, they had reminded everyone involved of the values and principles that made their service meaningful. The golden limousine would continue to rest in the royal garage, polished and maintained but no longer driven. It had become exactly what Queen Isabella had always intended, not just a vehicle, but a monument to the idea that true power comes from restraint, that genuine authority springs from service, and that the most important things in life are often those we choose to preserve rather than those we choose to use. In the quiet aftermath of the wedding, as the palace settled back into its normal rhythms, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had faced a test of character and emerged with their integrity intact. Queen Isabella's legacy was secure, not because it had been preserved unchanged, but because its core values had been honored and passed on to a new generation that understood their importance. The monarchy would face new challenges in the years ahead, but the precedent had been set. Symbol and substance, tradition and principle would not be sacrificed for convenience or political advantage. Captain Marcus Thornfield had kept his oath to protect and serve the crown, and in doing so, he had helped ensure that the crown remained worthy of that protection and service.